Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a couple of tales of natural disasters in LA when I put Mark Robson's Earthquake against Mick Jackson's Volcano. And this one was a very intense one because like I said, it's two natural disaster movies, and both films like kind of stick to the basic formula of the natural disaster film. So let's just dive right in to Mark Robson's Earthquake first. Naturally, the title says it all. Like, it's about an earthquake, and this is the big one that everybody always claims is going to hit LA. And so, but the cast itself too, and that's another thing about natural disaster movies is you really got to have a good ensemble cast of actors that can pull off the characters that they have to play, because most of the time the average ordinary people getting into extraordinary circumstances and seeing how they are tested through that shit. And we got Charlton Heston, who works for his father-in-law, Lauren Green, played by Lauren Green. And he's married to Ava Gardner in the film, and that marriage is a little bit on the rocks because he's also got a side thing with Genevieve Bejeweled. And we've also got George Kennedy, who probably hands down the best actor in the film, especially character wise. Because like what's crazy is like you would think like this guy would be the asshole of the movie, but he turns out to be one of the biggest heroes and stuff. But we see him as like kind of typical George Kennedy part where he's just like the asshole that just doesn't like shit, or kind of fumbling around and shit. But then, like I said, in the end, really, holds his own. And only other person that might outshine George Kennedy in this one is Walter Matthau's, that drunk at the bar, dressed like a pimp. And, just his whole, like, comedy spiel. And not even fully credited as him. There's, like, a weird, long-ass name. Maybe, I don't know if it was his real name or not. I don't look a lot of shit up. This is all off the cuff. Like I said, rough draft to a doctoral thesis. But anywho, we also get at, other at Richard Roundtree, of course, most famous for playing Shaft. He's in it as like an Evil Knievel, a daredevil type guy. And, another one, and probably the most intense one, is Marjoe Gortner, who, was also like an evangelist, preacher with a revival meeting. But he plays a psychotic, like, National Guard dude, the epitome of these, like, gun nut, karate freak motherfuckers, all self-defense type motherfuckers. And, he guns down, like, his roommates that are, like, fucking with him and shit. And because, that whole, we got to catch looters and stuff. And, and what's another element of the natural disaster film is that, like, a lot of times the people were worse than the actual natural disaster. In this case, like, Marjoe Gortner is, like, the epitome of like how shitty like people can get in these situations. And like also another one is the panic, and one thing too, especially with natural disaster movies, is the fucking how good the special effects are. Now Earthquake, their special effects are not to be fucked with. Like when the big earthquake goes on like that, the stuff that they did with that was incredible. Like they made that shit look realistic, and of course at this point in time in the 70s, everybody was trying to top the Poseidon Adventure. And I'd argue that that earthquake sequence is way more thrilling than the ship turning over sequence in the Poseidon Adventure. But, it could even be even, It's just that keep topping it and everything. And then, even like the way the destruction looks, but the one drawback for me with Earthquake is like the actors are not as compelling as they could be, aside from like George Kennedy and Marjoe Gortner and even the Walter Matthau's brief stint as the drunk in the film, but then moving forward to something like Volcano, which it has a feeling of a little more vibrancy. What's cool about Volcano is it doesn't get as bogged down in the drama that Earthquake does, because in Volcano, yet again, the title says it all. The movie's about a volcano in the middle of Los Angeles. And the film is led by Tommy Lee Jones, who, in my opinion, is a way better actor than Charlton Heston. I think Tommy Lee Jones commands the screen way better than Charlton Heston. If we're being honest, Charlton Heston's kind of mid. And we also have, with Tommy Lee Jones' character, he's the head of OEM, that's involved with all the, dealing with the natural disaster shit. And then we also have Anne Heche, who plays a very sexy geologist. You know, that's one thing about Hollywood is like anything that was like nerd related, you know, they were usually hot, you know. You very rarely see any like nerdy, you know, ugly nerds in movies, you know, but that's neither here nor there because, of course, you know, Hollywood movies are supposed to be sexy. You go to the movies to see an escape, you know, you don't want to see real life. You can see that any other time you're not sitting in front of a movie. But, you know, and also the Don Cheadle's in it, John Carroll Lynch, you know, and I will say that the movie's not is heavy-handed. There is a moment near the end of Volcano when, you know, everything's done and the ash they're recovering, and you got Keith David is the cop, and and the kid asks the kid where his mother, what does she look like, and his kid's looking around and everybody's just covered in ash. Everybody's gray, you know, white, black, brown, yellow, whatever the fuck. Everybody's gray, and little kid's like, oh yeah, everybody just looks the same. Look at him, you know. And there's a very heavy hand, but then it starts raining, you know. That right there, in and of itself, could take points off of this movie. But then, you know, once all that shit gets wrapped up, you know, Tommy Lee Jones and, you know, gets reunited with his kid, you know, and everything's all cool. You know, he's probably gonna be banging Anne Heche later, you know, and then fucking Randy Newman's I Love LA just comes up. You just see this fucking Mount Wilshire fucking volcano ruin, you know. So it's like it's a way better ending than Earthquake because Earthquake has one of the dumbest jokes to end a movie. You got this doctor that's just been through it. The doctor kind of a dick the whole time, and one of the things too about Earthquake that is even more so than Volcano is just the people like running shit, you know, not letting people know shit properly, and they're just the bureaucracy is almost more frightening than the natural disaster. You know, if people could just get their shit together, you know, because, you know, natural disasters only happen when you least expect them. So, like, how the hell can you, like, manage that shit? Why pour money into shit that might happen? You know, it's just, that's neither here nor there. That's a whole other debate for shit later. But, you know, we see that kind of shit. But even in Volcano, you know, somebody like, it kind of takes, why the fuck did you build this city, like, on a fucking seismic fucking, you know, shit show? And John Carroll Lynch, you know, that's another thing about these natural disaster movies. Like John Carroll Lynch's character, you know, is probably the biggest asshole in Volcano. And of course, he ends up paying for, you know, he learns his lesson and he has to give his life because he was such a dick and didn't fucking understand that, you know, maybe we should listen to geologists, maybe listen to science and type shit. So, you know, there's heavy-handed shit in Volcano as well, but it's not. It's dealt more with like just how fucked up the bureaucracy and human beings are, and as opposed to like also the fact that Charlton Heston has to in Earthquake, Charlton Heston has to sacrifice his life to save his wife. And they both die together while his mistress watches and all that kind of stuff. Like I said, a whole bunch of drama that it even could have been fleshed out further. Like when they're in that little like fucking garage, you know, that's like the triage unit and shit, you know, they could have had a moment where they confront each other, but they don't. Instead, there's that heavy-handed bullshit, you know. And I will say that maybe the writers of Volcano understood what the fuck they were trying to do a lot better than Earthquake. And also the danger in Volcano is a lot more prevalent. Like it's more believable, whereas like, you know, that scene where Genevieve Bejeweled is trying to save her son in Earthquake, and then they got the power lines that shit would have shocked the fuck out of both of them. Like that shit is, you know, the thing about Volcano is like it's much more believable. I wouldn't say that the special effects are any better than Earthquake, but as far as the actors and filmmakers understanding what situations they were in, I would say Volcano has to take it this round because, you know, it's just a way better movie than that, you know. And so for anybody keeping score, that's 27-26. 70s are still up by 1, but it looks like the 90s are coming back again. Like I said, the 90s will definitely surprise you. And the 90s were a lot better at making natural disaster movies. I feel like with the 70s, when they made these kinds of films, they were more interested in the set piece, you know, big special effects extravaganza. Like I said, at that point, everybody's trying to top Poseidon Adventure, and I don't think they really did fully. You know, they came very close with Earthquake, but I think the Towering Inferno might have topped it. But who knows? That may be a matchup for another round. But You know, at this point, like I said, Volcano though, very like I said, Tommy Lee Jones, what a fucking actor. You know, that man just commands the screen. And also, what's weird is like Mark Robson. You know, he was both these directors, Mark Robson and Mick Jackson, are clearly journeymen. But I think Mick Jackson may understand L.A. better than Mark Robson did, which was weird because there's somebody like Mark Robson who'd been working in Hollywood since the 40s. You know, by the time the 70s rolled around, you'd been in the town long enough. But you know, Mark Robson had done like a little bit of everything. He did film noir, you know, horror. He had did, you know, war films. You know, just about anything you could throw at him. But you know, when you think about Mick Jackson, the only like credit of his off the top of my head that I can think of is L.A. Story. So, you know, kind of funny to me, but like I said, 27-26 for anybody keeping score. You know, I mean, it's really heating up. And if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. You know, I'm also open to suggestions, collaborations. You know, YouTube's the culture. You know, just get it all together. And you know, the next main event is going to be North Dallas 40 versus Any Given Sunday, and you know, you'll see these bonus rounds pop up and everything. And so, like I said, just straight up sizzling, you know, not lava hot, but, you know, it's definitely warming up.